Well, welcome. I'm Scott Oeth, Cahill Financial Advisors, and here to host another webinar and very interesting advanced planning topic, and have a special guest today, Christy Boysen. Christy's with Apex Legacy Consultants. She is the Chief Executive Officer and specializes in working with people on their charitable endeavors and legacy planning. And Christy, I saw you speak at a professional association meeting, I think earlier this year, and we've had some great follow-up and interaction between. And this is just such an interesting and meaningful planning area, one of my favorite ones that spend time on with clients, especially this time of year. It's always seems to be a big topic. It's the season to talk about charitable giving and philanthropy. And, for me, it's just such an interesting mix of working with folks and helping them use their financial resources to support their favorite causes or organizations. And I love the interesting wrinkle of extra planning complexity and problem solving in there for me. But then, of course, to satisfy the analytical side, but then from the heart as well, feeling like you're really helping people accomplish their goals, kind of that thing with that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once they get beyond, am I okay? Have I achieved financial independence? And we spend a lot of time working financial planning tools with that. But then these are oftentimes next level type decisions. So I think this will be a great conversation. And one of the things that I was very interested in our last time we got together was your work around charitable remainder trust and some of the insights you had about how this strategy, which has been out there for a long time, is just such a cool strategy when it works. But my perception had always been it was really reserved for higher dollar type cases. And you shared some great stuff with me about how it might be more attainable at maybe a more still significant but modest gifting level. So we'll get to that, later on in the conversation, I think. But I do want to throw out, or I need to throw out, our standard disclosure that, Christy and I are going to be having a general conversation. No one watching or listening to this should consider this specific advice. Do your own research, talk to your own experts. Give either one of us a call, consult certainly in these types of matters with your attorney, your accountant, your financial advisor, philanthropy, or charitable giving consultant. There's a lot of complexity here, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it, both from taxes and estate planning rules and giving strategies, and think about where the dollars are going, right? That's a big issue, what it's all about. And I think also, I can't resist wearing the financial planner hat, how it impacts your situation, the interdependency of all the other moving pieces. So a lot of complexity. We're having this conversation here in late 2023. These things change, right? These tax laws change. So if you're listening to this at some point in the future, be sure and get an update on there. But with that, and I guess that formality out of the way, Christy, can you just tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, and this very interesting and meaningful area that you're in?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for letting me join you and just inviting me into this conversation around charitable trust. They are by far my favorite charitable vehicle out there. So you're hitting on something that I'm very passionate about. So just a little bit about myself. So I work with an organization that partners most traditionally with nonprofits, and we kind of provide a number of different supports around plan giving and non-cash giving. And often through that work, we get to work with individuals and families who are thinking about what generosity looks like for them. And that might be in current giving strategies, but oftentimes, given the name of our organization, legacy planning, we're often thinking and talking about end of life. So at the time that, we all pass away, what is our plan, and does it align with our values? Does it address any tax implications? Does it take care of our kids in the ways that they need to be taken care of? And so that's often where we then get to have these beautiful discussions around how all of that can merge into a plan that includes charitable giving. And Scott, like you mentioned, part of our previous conversations, you don't have to have millions and millions and millions of dollars to make a difference. You can, but you don't have to. And that's often where these vehicles, I think, get twisted. And so what we're here to do today is just to talk a bit about how this works and how it might fit within your own plan or someone you love's plan.
Yeah, that's great. And I like what you said, the part about non-cash gifts. In my last client newsletter that just went out recently. I had a bit in there because I know it's this time of year and a lot of organizations are asking for help and people are feeling, they're in the giving season. But I said, put down the pen, put away the checkbook. Let's talk first. Because even at more modest gift levels, looking across the balance sheet for other types of assets, some other types of tools or techniques, gifting appreciated mutual fund shares or using a donor advised fund, those types of things are often a way to help optimize and really stretch your giving dollars rather than putting on your credit card or writing a check if possible. And the part about families, I mean, this is I find that across income or wealth spectrum, there's some commonalities, like problems or issues are different, at the lower end than the higher end, but a few commonalities, time poverty. No matter how much money or affluence people have, they're always looking for help and there's not enough time in the day. That's one. But I think the other one is, children, grandkids, family, trying to pass on values, think about financial stewardship and this area, charitable giving and planned giving is a wonderful area, I think, to open up those family conversations where sometimes maybe you have a successful executive or business owner and it might be hard or sensitive, kind of broaching the topic of family wealth and where they're at, and thinking about generosity is a great way to lead into those conversations and start including the next generation. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and we could have a whole nother conversation about creative strategies to, encourage generational generosity, right? It's not just about passing on wealth, though sometimes it is, or that's a part of it, but it's how do we also pass on those things that really matter to us as well? And generosity often is a part of that. So.
Well, that's great. We should do that. Let's
We totally can.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Speaking of other conversations, one thing I did want to mention, just a little bit of a plug. On my blog, scottoeth.com, I've written a few blog posts related to these topics and have some other related webinars. So if you're listening or watching, you're interested in this, have a year ago, did one with Russell James, who's a noted charitable giving expert. And he and I had a great conversation, and also did a series with John Nersessian, who's a wealth strategist. And we talked a lot specifically about corporate executives and concentrated stock, and a few of the areas really tie in with how to diversify and we're going for that. So some related content. But for today, one of the things we want to focus on is charitable remainder trust. Christy, what is a charitable remainder trust?
Yeah. So I love to think about this vehicle as a give it twice trust. So they are designed, charitable remainder trust, they're designed to pay out a stream of income, typically to heirs, or it could be yourself if you're funding it during life. It could just be your best friend or neighbor if you really wanted, but to pay a stream of income with the remaining balance going to charity. That's why it's called the charitable remainder trust. The remainder goes to charity, but it's this kind of two-part entity, right? Consistent income streams to loved ones, and then that final payout. There is something I'll just touch on, and if we feel like going into this later, we can. There's another type of charitable trust called a charitable lead trust. The charitable lead trust first leads by paying to charity, with the remaining balance going to kids, grandkids, etc. So there's the remainder trust, there's the lead trust, and those two words just help determine when charity receives the benefit and when loved ones receive the benefit.
Yeah, there's lots of different versions of these charitable trust, isn't there? It reminds me, I was thinking about this, when I was a kid, I loved going to Baskin Robbins, and it was like 31 flavors. I think there's like 31 flavors of charitable trust, isn't there? And it's kind of like I'm trying to play Scrabble with my my little boy or something, the words Krutz, Kratz, and Nimkruts, and all these different types of versions that come up. But yeah, very, very interesting. The term I'll hear sometimes, sort of the legal term, is split interest gift, right? So you're making a charitable donation, but there's a split interest. You or family member or something like that is getting a stream of income as well.
That's exactly right. Which also means, right, charitable deductions are a part of these. So there's, and we can get into the weeds here in a minute on this, but oftentimes, we're putting assets into a charitable trust that have appreciated. And so often if we just sell that asset, then there's going to be some tax realized, where a charitable trust can come in, is help either will eliminate oftentimes that tax or minimize it through this charitable deduction. So there's a lot of strategy to how these can work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, there's lots of interesting tax planning strategies we spend time on here in the office. This one has some powerful tax advantages, really fantastic, but it does need to begin with the charitable intent, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's rare when we really look at the numbers that it's just going to come out ahead as a pure tax win, although it might be close, but it's definitely best when there's a significant charitable intent. That's part of what someone is planning for or intending. And then this trust, as you mentioned, you can make a gift, often highly appreciated assets. So you can get a charitable income tax deduction there, right?
Yeah.
And there's some complicated rules depending what type of property it is and how much of a deduction you get and what the payout stream is and how long and all that. But you can get an income tax deduction in the year of the gift. And then very interestingly, the property, once it's in the trust is a tax exempt entity and it can sell this property without recognizing capital gains tax, right? So you've worked for a local corporation, you've done very well. Maybe you have stock options that have vested, you have a big block of highly appreciated company stock, or you inherited, or you have real estate or some other case studies I think we'll touch on in a little bit, but those can be sold within the trust without recognizing the tax at that point. So you can
Exactly.
settle and you can diversify. And because oftentimes people feel stuck. We've had many times someone come in, they have significant wealth on their balance sheet, but they don't feel like they can sell it, or to sell it would create a very painful tax bill. So you can donate to this trust, get an income tax deduction, sell it, the trust can sell it, and diversify to protect that wealth and spread the risk. And then another key part of it is this split interest concept, right? Unlocking the income stream that can come back. And many, and then a huge part of it, Christy, I mean, if you make one of these significant gifts, if you're in a situation where there's an estate tax liability, it's not as big a factor. It hasn't been recently at the federal level because we have very high federal estate tax limits at this point comparatively, but the state of Minnesota is still there. But you make this gift, these assets are outside of your taxable estate for estate tax purposes, right?
Exactly. Yep. So a charitable remainder trust is considered an irrevocable trust. So as soon as it's funded, that asset is no longer yours. You've gifted it. They sell it, invest it, whatever it might be. You get that income. So that then becomes a part of your estate, especially if you're saving it, reinvesting it, all of that. But the bulk that's been placed into the charitable trust is now removed. So federal estate tax, pretty high right now, 2026, slotted to drop. But in Minnesota, we have a lower estate tax threshold. That's a 3 million and it's not combinable. So it's not hard for someone to get to a $3 million estate if there's been, investments in retirement, some real estate, all of that. And so this can be a really great strategy in someone's estate as well. And often then, of course, the beneficiaries would be kids, grandkids, with the final distribution going to charity.
Yeah, and kind of an interesting side note to that, out of the estate as an irrevocable trust. And this is definitely an area where, get expert advice, but there can be asset protection advantages as well. If you're moving a significant amount of assets into this charitable trust and, it is what it is, it's irrevocable trust, you can't get that money back other than the stream of income. And there can be ways to design it so the trust can turn that on or off. It could protect a lot of those assets from lawsuit potentially. But like I say, that's a excellent attorney discussion. I'm just going to mention that as kind of a reference point. Christy, could you tell us a little bit more about that stream of income? You mentioned it could go to different people, how long it could last, how it's calculated, some of those factors.
Sure. So there's some interesting kind of rules around the duration of a charitable remainder trust. So let's first talk about it as something you might fund during life. So let's say you have some rental properties and you're in your 70s and you just no longer want that asset. It's too much maintenance. Whatever. You're just ready to be rid of it, but you've got a really low cost basis. It's appreciated significantly, but you also kind of rely on that income from the rent, right? So there's kind of a couple pieces at play here. What you could do is gift one of those pieces of property, all of them, into a charitable trust. And then you can set it up to do a couple different things. So the way they're structured is you can either do a lifetime. So if you fund it while you're living, you could have it pay out a stream of income to you, your partner, for your lifetime, and then it could stop. You could also do a lifetime plus up to 20 years. So this is where we'll see a multi-generational structure. So you, your partner, can receive this while you're living. Then your kids could receive a stream of income for 5, 10, 15, up to 20 additional years. Of course, then 20 years after you've passed is when the charity receives the benefit. If you don't do a lifetime or a lifetime plus up to 20, you can also set these up to pay out to loved ones. If you don't want to do a lifetime, or if your heirs, for example, are young, a lifetime may not quite pass the mathematical equation to ensure that funds are left at the end for charity. So if you're not doing a lifetime, then it would need to be 20 years or less.
Okay.
So often, when we see families fund these out of their estate for their heirs, for example, usually in that case, appreciated assets, of course, get a step up in basis with current legislation, all of that. So those assets may not be, again, depending on the goals of the family, what they would want to fund a charitable trust with. But out of an estate, retirement, particularly any pre-tax assets, think IRAs, 401ks, some annuities, etc., can be great, because those, when they are passed on to kids, they do not receive a tax break. So heirs would end up paying income tax on that. If you've not paid it, the government still is going to want it. So heirs would end up paying that, even if the estate is not taxable. Those assets can be great for funding a charitable remainder trust in someone's estate. Often what we'll see when that's the case is it will be set up to pay out over 20 years or less to their heirs, kids, grandkids, etc. Again, if heirs are older, we might be able to do that lifetime plus 20. So that would be your kids' lifetimes and then 20 years to their children. But often we'll see 20 years. Now, you asked another question, Scott, the percentage or what annually can be paid out. So the minimum percentage is 5%. What we typically see in a lifetime or a 20-year payout is 5 to 6% is pretty common. Sometimes I'll see 7%. Again, also depends on how old someone is and how long their life expectancy is. The government tells you your age limit, so don't worry, you can look it up. Somewhere in the 90s is what they think. But if you're doing a shorter duration or you're just later in life, it's not uncommon to then see higher percentage payouts. Pretty rarely do I see above 10%. But let's say you do a 5 or a 10-year distribution, 10% might be what you could set that up to pay out. The biggest thing to know is that when that percentage gets higher, those annual payouts oftentimes are coming first out of interest gained, and then it might dip into the principal, whatever that funding amount was. So the higher percentage, if the market's volatile or we have several years where it's not great, we might be dipping more into the principal, meaning the payouts each year get smaller and the amount of charity gets smaller. So those are some factors that we're going to think about with you, or we would encourage you to think about when you're putting a plan together for how a charitable trust fits into your estate or your current giving.
Yeah, and there's some great tools where you can plug in all these numbers, right? It's kind of like you squeeze a water balloon and it blows up over here or there, trying to figure out, the payout, the length, the time. And so if a few things you came to mind as you're talking there, this stream of income that's coming back, the younger someone is, the lower, because there's some exciting parts here, right? Okay, wow, I make a gift of appreciated assets, I get a big charitable income tax deduction, right? So maybe we talk about that. Boy, there's so much we could talk about, but there are some limits there depending on the type of property that's donated, how much you can actually deduct against your adjusted gross income. And if you hit that limit, good news is you can carry that deduction forward for up to 5 years. Is that right, Christy?
That's correct. Yep. So a
Okay.
total of 6 years. Mhm.
Okay, so there's some mechanics there, and then thinking about that income stream, the younger someone is, like, you hear about young folks who've maybe made a tremendous amount of gains on cryptocurrency or something, not something I'm all that excited about, but it
Sure.
is out there and it's happened, donating to a charitable remainder trust if you're in your early 30s, that income tax deduction is going to be smaller because you're so young if you're choosing a lifetime payout, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And another interesting element, you're talking about going to heirs, like say kids for their lifetime or 20 years or different
Mhm.
options that you have there. One of the things that's still fairly new that working through with a lot of people is in the Secure Act, whereas those IRAs that you're talking about, 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, we used to be able to do what's called a stretch beneficiary, and your heirs could take that money out over their lifetime using the IRS chart. Well, now it's a 10-year payout that's mandated. And so if grandpa and grandma done well or parents have, it could be a large amount of money that could be coming down to your kids or your grandkids, maybe when they're right in their peak earning years. If they inherit when they're in their 40s or 50s or early 60s, it could be a lot of money that's forced to be paid out as taxable income in their peak earning years. And what you just said, the ability, some people are talking about the strategy of using a charitable remainder trust as a beneficiary to essentially kind of replicate that stretch IRA, because the IRA could pay to the charitable remainder trust and stretch that payout period out for a long period of time to spread that income tax bill to your beneficiaries. Um, or just other capital gains assets. We do have different tiers of capital gains rates. There's net investment income, and instead of recognizing it, it's not just that the trust can sell it and not recognize the immediate tax, but you mentioned this tiering of how those payments are taxed when they come back to the grantor. If that's spread out over a period of time, it can help not just kind of the dollar amount of, oh, I don't want to write this check all at once, but keeping you under thresholds possibly for lower tax rates, right?
Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that is something that's missed. But Christy, could you tell us? I mean, so you gift different types of property, you get a charitable income tax deduction. That's great. It goes
Yep.
into the trust. It's sold. There's no immediate tax bill to the grantor. But that stream of income, there's this tiering order. How does
Sure.
that work? Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on this here, but maybe Scott, we can pull together a
Yeah.
resource or something that we can share.
Mhm.
So yes, there's 4 or 5 different tiers, and there's it tends to kind of get smaller with the duration of time. So you'll pay the bulk of the tax up front in
Mhm.
those first years of the distributions. It gets smaller as time goes on. So that is a factor, Scott, I think when we're thinking about funding a charitable trust and where that charitable intent plays in, right? So it's not completely free of any taxes. That's something for us to keep in mind, but it does allow this kind of bonus to go to charity that really didn't exist without this tool or this structure, while still receiving some income yourself or your heirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it gets complex, but I think it's a piece that's sometimes missed. Is
Yep.
there's a
Yep.
little bit of I don't want to say it's a gotcha, but there's a little bit there. You got to remember that these payments coming out over that period of time, they're likely as a tax liability.
Yep.
Of
Yep.
course, you could just write a check and fund this trust, right? But
Mhm.
as you mentioned, it's usually ideal to look around and say, is there real estate? Are there some other assets that have soared in value or
Yep.
just grew nicely over a long period of time that we'd like to donate those instead?
I
Yeah.
was working, just to share a little story. So I'm currently in conversations with an attorney, and so I do just to capture this. So I do most of my work with nonprofits and their donors, but I've built relationships with attorneys and advisors and others who will bring me in to kind of draw these illustrations to help their clients think more strategically about their estate at large or a specific asset and how they might be able to mitigate some taxes with it. So was working with an attorney earlier this year. She has a client who has about $9 million in stock. When they invested it, they spent about 70,000. So they don't want this anymore. They want to give it to their kids. But if
Mhm.
they just gift it, we've got some gift tax thresholds each year, or we
Mhm.
start to impact, of course, the lifetime gifting that we can give.
Yeah.
Um, but we also, if they just sell it outright, we're dealing with some pretty significant tax implications.
Yep.
So If I'm remembering my math, I think it was projected about 3 million in taxes of this $9 million asset. They, again, could still gift about 6 million of that to their
Yep.
kids now or down the road, but we have this huge tax implication. And so for them, generosity is something they're considering, although that's not their number one goal. The number one goal is get this asset to my kids. But strategically, they lose a huge portion of that asset. So this is where a charitable trust, maybe a donor advised fund combo, could be a way that they could eventually get this asset out of their estate and to their children.
Fantastic. Sounds like an interesting case.
Yes. Well, they're still making decisions, so I'll let you know what they decide.
Kind of in the alphabet soup, just to touch on it, you mentioned that one version is you give assets to the trust and the charity benefits for a period of time, and then the remainder assets go to the family or the non-charitable beneficiaries. The other type is, we give assets and income stream, that split interest comes to the family or the donor or the non-charitable beneficiary, and then the remainder goes to charity. But even with that charitable remainder trust, there's unit trust and there's annuity trust, CRUTs and CRATs. What are we dealing with there?
Alphabet soup. So the biggest thing to note when it comes to a CRAT versus a CRUT is, and really this again comes down to the goal of the family and the duration of the trust and the percentage payout of the trust. So an annuity trust is going to be a fixed amount that pays out for the duration of the CRUT or the CRAT payouts. So an example of when this might be a good fit, we'll use that donor that I've worked with that has rental properties. They really need a consistent stream of income to help fund their retirement, but they want to release these properties. For them, an annuity trust provides consistent, regular payouts every single year until that trust expires. So annuity, just like you might set up an annuity in a different structure, is going to be very consistent in what those payouts are. Often it's based on a percentage. So it might be based on 6% of the estate, or 6% of the trust, but then that 6% stays fixed. A unitrust is going to be a percentage that's going to fluctuate with the growth or the shrinking of the trust. So if we do that 6% again with this property that's funded, it is going to recalculate or recalibrate every single year and do 6% of the total. So if the trust grows, which if we look historically at charitable remainder trusts, they tend to grow about 6 to 8% a year. So 6% a year, let's say it consistently just on average grows 7% a year. That 6% is going to be based on a slightly larger amount every single year. So the CRUT is going to then potentially grow if the principal gets bigger over time. Now, it also has the potential to dip. There's a little more variability in it. So depending on the goals of the funder or the donor is going to determine which of those is better. And again, depending on the duration, the percentage amount, we may not be able to do, for example, a lifetime CRAT, but we can definitely do a lifetime CRUT because the CRUT basically preserves that principal more likely than the CRAT is. If we have 10 horrible years when a CRAT is funded, the annuity trust is funded, we'll probably start to see a decrease. And now we might be upside down. And so the CRUT tends to be more utilized.
Yeah. You're seeing the CRUT more often.
That's what I'm seeing more of.
Yeah. And that methodology or that approach is so much in line with how we're often working with people and looking, okay, you've saved for a long time, you're at retirement, how much can we spend? How do you manage that pool of assets? So that fits very much in line with how we're often thinking about people with their personal retirement stream. And so those decisions come into play, whether it's on your personal balance sheet or inside the CRUT. How do you build a portfolio to weather market storms, bridge over the bad years and capture the rise in the up years. But yeah, CRUT. The other interesting thing, so a CRUT can take additional contributions as well. Is that true? So if you establish a charitable remainder unit trust, which CRUT, I think in later years, you can make some additional contributions, whereas a CRAT, the annuity trust, is fixed on the initial value. Yeah.
Yep. And there's kind of a process there. So oftentimes if you're wanting to add, let's say you funded your CRUT during life with a $500,000 property.
Mhm.
And down the road, you decide, I want to also fund it with, I don't know, $500,000 of my stock. You can do that. The way it works is they actually stay. That's not a good example. Let's do two real estate and two properties. So funded with property, CRUT gets funded, sells off the property. Now those dollars are invested.
Mhm.
5 years later, you have another $500,000 rental property you want to release. Again, you would want it to probably, just for ease and for financial implications, want it to go into that original CRUT. It's actually going to go into what's called a flip CRUT to start.
Mhm.
The flip CRUT is going to take that entity, so they're separate, take that entity, sell it. Once it's sold, it's going to fund the original CRUT with the money. And then it gets invested, and now you get twice as much in those payouts every year if it's the same amount.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned flip CRUT, there's NIM CRUT. We mentioned there's all these different versions, but there are some very interesting ones where you could make the contribution and the assets are essentially held and invested for a period of time, and that income's turned on at a later point, right? That's kind of what
Yes.
you're referring to. Yeah.
Yep. So that's more like a NIM CRUT. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
So it's not uncommon, especially with, appreciated assets, or it might take a little bit of time for that to, whatever it is, to be sold.
Yeah.
The NIM CRUT allows that flexibility. And it's really just my understanding, a couple sentences that get added into the trust language
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
just allows that permission for the recipient of those payouts to say, not yet, we'll wait. And then you get a little bit more down the road.
Mhm. Yeah. Very interesting technique. With that, and I mean, we could be here, we could do a week-long conference, right? But there's a slew of other plan giving tools or charitable donation techniques. And I tend to just very quickly draw a line. There's ones where you're just purely making a donation. You're giving stuff, money, property directly to a charitable organization, or you're using some type of vehicle like a donor advised fund or a foundation, but the money is out the door, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the split interest type ones like charitable trust or charitable gift annuity,
Mhm.
pooled income fund, where maybe there's that split interest. Am I thinking about it the right way? How would
You
you
are.
classify, or maybe just, is there a way to give us a quick overview of kind of pros and cons and the zoo of charitable techniques here?
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, I'm working on a presentation for a different client of mine. And I've got a nice slide that just walks through exactly what you did, Scott. Let me pull that up here. If
Great.
you just give me a moment. Yeah, I will not get into the rest of the slides, but this one will at least give you a nice overview. All right. While I live on Zoom, I feel like I still push the wrong buttons on a regular basis. All righty. Pull up my other screen here. Okay. All right. Can you see this okay?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So what you were just talking about, Scott, we've got kind of the give now category. So this would be, hey, I want to support my favorite two nonprofits, or it's end of year, and I just want to be as generous as I can, or mitigate tax, or whatever the goals are, right? And get a charitable deduction. So in this category, you can, of course, give cash or write a check. You can also gift real estate, stock mutual funds. You can gift directly out of your IRA over the age of 70 and a half. That can be a really great giving strategy. And that means you basically don't collect or track the income portion of that.
Yes. Yep.
So
Mhm.
huge, couple different wins there. You can often give more
Sure.
to charity, mitigate tax. Of course, you can gift crops, livestock, farm equipment. We see a lot of that in the smaller towns around us. Business interest depends a bit on the structure of that organization. It probably is going to take a bit more time to make happen. So December is maybe not when I would start that, but if you're there and you want to, there's smart people like Scott and others that can help you figure that out.
I
And
just know
then
who to call, Christy.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit more tricky.
Mhm.
Um, and then of course, donor advised fund grants. And that can mean, granting out of the donor advised fund or actually contributing funds to the donor advised
Sure.
fund. Now getting that tax deduction, charitable deduction today. Then we have that split interest. That would be the receive income and give now or later category. You hit all of those, Scott. So charitable gift annuities, charitable remainder trusts, either funding currently or out of your estate, and then the charitable lead trusts. And then we have the setup now, but the money doesn't really get given to those nonprofits until later. This
Mhm.
is often, of course, something you're doing at the time you pass away. So, will or a living trust, maybe just specific trust assets, beneficiary proceeds. So, this would be updating your beneficiary designations, life insurance, reserved life estate, and again, funding a donor advised fund. So those are the main types of giving strategies or different vehicles and where they fit. Is that helpful?
This is great. I love your visual, and it definitely helps sort it out. So in the middle bucket, since that's kind of what we're focusing on, you've got charitable gift annuities. So that is maybe just a minute or two, kind of explain what
Mhm.
charitable gift annuity is and maybe compare and contrast versus the charitable remainder trust.
Sure, sure. So charitable gift annuities, I would say we tend to see a kind of an ebb and a flow to these getting set up, but they tend to have a lower threshold for funding. So a charitable gift annuity might be a great fit for someone who maybe they have $50,000 in their mutual funds and they want a consistent stream of income, but they want whatever's left to go to charity.
Mhm.
So they can gift that $50,000, set up a charitable gift annuity. They then, depending on their age, are going to receive a fixed income for the duration of their lifetime. Now, there's again nuances to it. You can defer it, you can set it up for your loved one, you can set it for yourself and your partner. So, a couple of different structures for it. But the giving threshold tends to be lower.
Yeah.
I would say an alternative to the charitable gift annuity would actually be the charitable remainder trust, which we were talking about. Now, charitable remainder trusts tend to be funded with more, but there is a misnomer out there that says CRUTs or CRATs have to be funded, with $1 million or $5 million, and that's the best way that they can be utilized. Now, we usually can't get as low as funding it with a $50,000 amount, like maybe a gift annuity. But at about 200,000 to 250, that tends to be what I'll see as kind of the minimum threshold. And at that rate, then you get that payout 5-6% for lifetime, X number of years. It's a good option. And especially if we're looking at a charitable gift annuity, there's a joke in the nonprofit space that says, if you want to live well into your 100s, set up a charitable gift annuity, because oftentimes, now the stats are not necessarily quite as
Yeah.
dramatic as
Yeah.
that, but oftentimes people will live beyond their life expectancy, and it can then trigger that nonprofit to not receive whatever it's funded with, because now you, as the funder, are receiving payouts that are above and beyond what you funded it with.
Right. If you way overshoot the mortality expectations, that charity's paying you out a lot longer than they thought they were going to have to. And yeah, well, that's a
Exactly.
good tip. I may go this afternoon and looking to set one up. I'd like to be
Right.
around for a
If you
while.
want to
So,
live to be 101, set up that
uh-huh.
CGA.
Okay.
So the nice thing about a charitable remainder trust is you could still set that up for your lifetime, again, depending on your age, and receive these payouts. But because of how it's structured, particularly the CRUT, it's that percentage, it's then going to withstand the variability of the market and really preserve a
Yeah.
final payout to charity. So
Yeah.
again, depending on your goals, age, some of those factors, the remainder trust can be a better scenario for both providing that income and caring for charity.
Yeah. Charitable gift annuities could be a big topic in its own. A few things that come to mind quickly is you do want to be somewhat aware of the financial strength or condition of the organization you're donating to, if
Mhm.
you really want to get that stream of income back, right? I mean, that's a consideration, is how are those assets going to be managed and the health of the organization. But I do think it's something that doesn't get enough attention. Insurance agents, commission type advisors, love to promote annuities as retirement income stream. That is one way to look at, but I think in many cases people might do well to, especially, if they are interested in generosity, they have a big heart, comparing a charitable gift annuity versus a commercial annuity. They might be assuming more risk in terms of those payments coming back, but the ability to get charitable deduction, what's left over if you don't live a long time, if you come in below the mortality expectations, and so that money being left with the life insurance company that's created a commercial annuity, it's left with your favorite organization or cause or your alma mater or whatever, and the ability to donate appreciated property. And there's a new wrinkle, Christy, isn't there, with the latest version of the Secure 2.0? You can give, what is it, $50,000 directly from an IRA to a charitable gift annuity or a charitable remainder trust. But like you said, that's probably a little low to actually look at a charitable remainder trust at this point.
Yeah, that's one of the I would say that the unfortunate parts of that. It's great that it's an option, but yes, to start funding a charitable remainder trust with 50,000 is a bit small. You and your partner could both do 50,000. Then we're getting to the 100,000. You may want to gift additional stock, so you could get to that 200,000 potentially with some ease, but it's probably going to be tough to fund a CRT with that. But yes, a charitable gift annuity, it's a great option. I often think of CGAs, which is charitable gift annuity. I often think of those as a really great entry level kind of strategy. So if you just want to test this out, get a sense of how it works, it's a good fit. And if your favorite organization, maybe it is your alma mater or another nonprofit in your community, if they don't have a CGA program, if they're maybe not equipped or they don't have the right resources, or again, they often need a decent amount of funds in an endowment, for example, before they're probably equipped with a base amount to cover their bases. There are organizations that can set these up that still can benefit that nonprofit, but the nonprofit doesn't have to carry the risk. So there are CGA companies out there. There are local foundations like St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation, St. Croix Valley. All of those are equipped to help you do that, and we'll still get that final payout to charity to the ones you choose.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, it's a very interesting strategy in its own right. So one of the things I was very excited to talk about today is just that the cost and that point you made about the perception of where charitable trust can come into play. Because I'll say, earlier in my career in the late 90s, I was on a consulting planning team for a major financial services organization, and estate planning was a big deal because the federal estate tax limit was $675,000. Before that was $625,000. So we were getting calls and working on cases all day long for years, where it was Midwestern farmer who'd built up some land value, but nothing really eye-popping, but they're facing a federal estate tax liability. Or you had .com stock wealth then until it all blew up in 2000. So we're looking at charitable remainder trust often at that time because of the low estate tax limits, and people say, well, this is great, I can give to charity, I can help that organization, I can give a stream of income, get these assets out of my taxable estate. But then I guess I'd say I guilty. I was in that camp, as I would talk to different legal professionals or people, I really had that perception that charitable remainder trust is, it's kind of a strategy exclusively for like $1 million gifts on up. And you'd hear different opinions about, well, the legal costs to set this up and maintain, because there's setup cost and then there's ongoing cost, were so significant that it really had to be a pretty large gift. But conversation with you is a real eye opener. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about that? The cost, if someone had, let's say they've done well, they're financially independent, they're retired, they have a nice taxable portfolio of a few $1 million. They don't want to give it all away, but something like $250,000 seems like it's certainly within the realm, especially if it's going to be a stream of income. What type of costs would they be looking at? How do you do this and make it affordable at that type of gift level?
Sure. So let's talk about the cost for setup and then the ongoing maintenance of the trust. And then I do have an illustration that maybe I can share just to take these concepts and kind of make it real. So often there are a couple upfront costs. So If you are funding this charitable trust today, or you are funding it out of your estate, there are going to be fees for an attorney to draft those documents. So a charitable remainder trust or a lead trust can be a standalone trust, or it can be built into maybe a revocable trust, a part of your estate documents. Either way, I tend to see the fees for just the drafting of that on the low side, $1,000, all the way on up. And it tends to be, I don't know, an estate attorney could tell you, but it tends to be, I would say, 10-ish pages long,
Okay.
outlining all the different components of that. So
Yeah.
low ball 1,000 up to maybe 7,000 to get this
For
charitable
the
trust
setup. Yeah.
drafted.
Okay. Mhm.
Then there should not be fees until it's been funded. So let's say you set this up. I'm working with a family right now. They intend to eventually sell their $1 million home. They have a different home in Florida. So they are already thinking when they sell their home here in the Midwest that they will gift either part or all of it to a charitable remainder trust. They're working with an attorney to draft it so that it's ready to go, because when the time hits and it's right to sell, they want to be prepared with all the pieces in place. So that's where shouldn't be any fees until it's been gifted. At the time then that the charitable trust is funded, so whether it's with the real estate or it's with mutual funds or appreciated business stock or retirement out of your estate, once the funds go into this charitable trust, they get gifted to, often it's a foundation or some other charitable entity. Then there are typically some fees. So if it's just more or less cash or it's getting invested, there's typically just the management fees and the administration fees. I usually see those sit at between 1 to 1.5% per year. So that's just an annual fee associated with, just like, we would have our investment advisor investing our funds. There's going to be fees there. So there's the annual fees for investing and administrating. Now, the administrating piece is going to be all the different paperwork associated with a trust. So and of course, writing the checks to the kids or you or grandkids, whomever it is, year over year. So the administration portion of it kind of covers all that annual work and the filing of the trust paperwork for taxes each year. Sometimes, depending on the organization, I will see an additional fee assigned to the CRUT or CRAT when it comes to the taxes. So some will just include that in that annual percentage, and that's just built in. Some will have an additional $500 to $1,000 pull out once a year for the tax preparation side of it. So 1 to 1.5% per year. Now, if you are funding a CRUT or gifting a CRUT, anything that's going to need to be sold, or it's, a more unique asset. So think collections, real estate, things like that need to be sold usually by a realtor or someone else. That often then is going to have a fee as well. Again, the CRUT, whenever it is kind of sold and cash enters, it will pay that. So if, a realtor makes $10,000 on it, that'll get pulled. And then the rest of those funds will go into the CRUT, creating the annual payouts. Does that help answer?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's great. You had mentioned in one of our conversations that some organizations, I think you said some churches or religious organizations, sometimes will even cover the cost of establishing these types of trust, and that partnering maybe with larger community foundations, they'll cover some of the administrative costs. Is that true?
Yep, it is. So I see less and less of this, but there are some particularly like faith-based foundations that will cover the cost of the drafting of these charitable trusts. So they have a partnership with an attorney that does the drafting, or they'll kind of cover it in some way, shape, or form. And then there are some foundations. So my alma mater, their foundation has a structure, and so far they've not changed it, where if I set up a charitable trust with them, I pay for the attorney to draft it, but there are no fees. as long as a percentage stays at the university. And then a percentage can also leave. So that's I would say, pretty unique and generous structure, but they're depending on who you're affiliated with, the nonprofits that you care for, and the foundation you want to use for managing it. Sometimes those fees can completely disappear or be much less than they could be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very interesting. So don't write it off because you've heard you need $5 million to do this. It might be affordable and a viable strategy at a lower dollar level. So very
Exactly.
Well, can I throw a couple cases by you, some things
Sure.
that have come up in recent meetings that we're working on? One, we have a client who lives in California and successful real estate investor. She would buy homes and fix them up and rent them out. And over time, it's worked very well for her with the rising property market out there. And but no children, and would like the bulk of her wealth to go to a nature conservancy type organization out there, but has one property in particular that she'd love to get rid of, is worried about the tax liability, and you would like to generate some income. She actually wants to go live in Europe for a while and get some extra income coming in. So what do you think? Property's worth about $1 million. Is this a case for a CRUT?
Absolutely, yes. So there's a couple things that I would want to consider. So like we talked about early on, the charitable deduction of a charitable trust is going to be less than the funding amount, but it is likely going to be significant. Mathematically, if you're doing a 20-year one, I would assume maybe like a third. So a third of whatever the funding amount for her would maybe be 300,000 or so. So a couple of things I would want to consider if I were advising her in this. She wants to release this property. Does she have any needs for cash now?
Yeah.
Does she want to make a difference, at that nature conservancy sooner than later? Maybe it's a partial gift, partial sale. Maybe she takes out 200,000 of it. She gifts 300,000 of it and she puts 500,000 into the CRUT. So there doesn't have to be an all in. She could do partial gift, partial sale. The other piece I'd want to consider is where's her current income level, and what then does that mean her charitable deduction can be year to year. For example, I talked about that $9 million stock. For them, if they gifted all of that to fund a CRUT, they would be way beyond what the 6-year distribution period would be. So we would also want to just think through, okay, over the course of this year and the next 5, what are those thresholds?
Right.
And is there any strategy there? So there's a couple layers.
Maybe even turning on other income from other parts of the portfolio to essentially soak up those charitable deductions, right?
Exactly.
It could help offset or shelter some other asset positioning. Yeah, very, very interesting.
So there's definitely some strategy there, but let me just to kind of share, is this okay, Scott? Can I share an illustration here?
Please.
So I'm going to share this one here. So this isn't quite that scenario, but just for the sake of making a little bit of sense here. So let's say that she decided to fund a charitable trust with $400,000. Or excuse me, with $350,000. So again, we're not funding it out of the estate, but if she were to fund a charitable trust with $350,000 and she received 5% payouts, and this could be for her lifetime, 20 years, what have you, the payouts from that would be $17,500. So if she doubled that, it would be twice that, right? In the regular stream of income. We project the tax at about 25%. As we talked earlier, there's some additional layers to what that tax calculation actually looks like, but on average, about 25% can kind of be expected. But then at the time that this CRUT finished paying out, whether it's 20 years later or at the end of her life, at 5% with a projected growth of 1% a year, so year over year over year, just with the 350, she'd be able to gift over 400,000 to charity. So if you double that, now the gift to charity is over 800. You triple that, now the gift is over 1.2. So that's the beauty. The annual payouts get bigger, the total amount gets larger, there's a charitable deduction, and there's this huge gift that can go to charity at the end. I hope that
Fantastic.
was helpful.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Another one that we see quite a bit is, family farms. It's such a big thing here in the Midwest and the upper Midwest. And, we'll have folks who have done well and they have some financial assets, but in a way you might almost look and say they're a bit cash poor, looking at the value of the farmland. And one of the interesting things is, I mean, it seems to me the strongest emotional ties are those family farms. And oftentimes you have that generation that's still worth the farm and they don't want to sell it, or maybe even they've inherited the farm and they're renting it out, but they still remember. I've had several clients tell me, grandpa said never sell the farm, you can always get income from the farm. And my mom came off farm in Iowa, and so I certainly understand where the sentiment is coming from. You can just picture the years and years of blood, sweat, and tears and backbreaking work and all that. But I have to say, what we're seeing is mid-career adult children or grandchildren who've moved to the city and they work in technology, or they're teachers or whatever they are, and really they have no interest in the land itself. They would like the value of it. They would like some type of financial support. Certainly, not many people are just wanting to turn that away. But so we have two different folks who are kind of in that situation where they're holding this farmland, and they're both certainly charitably inclined. They'd like to give and help other causes. Unlocking some income would help, because like I say, they have financial assets, but maybe that feels a bit constrained compared to their overall value of their assets. Charitable remainder trust, something to consider here.
Absolutely. Yes. Same structure, right? It could be, a 100% gift to fund this charitable remainder trust. Obviously, the larger amount they put in, the more that they'll get in that stream of income. It can be a partial gift, partial sale. The other thing that I think would be, important for us to just note. So when it does come to real estate, there are some steps that need to be taken kind of before gifting.
Okay.
So oftentimes a foundation is going to require an appraisal to be completed to make sure that that property can actually be sold. That appraisal has to be funded by the donor. And so it would be very wise to then, get this appraisal. There's some time limits as to, how close to the sale, but then there is also some, the good of that is, right? So maybe it's worth 5 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So now when that property is sold, that foundation needs to kind of keep the sale as close to that 5 million or more as possible. So there's some additional, I would say, responsibility on that front. There could even be conversations had, I would be cautious on this, but with potential buyers, but nothing should be documented. That gift needs to happen first to get the full deduction, and then the sale can happen. So that's another place I've seen individuals get a little stuck, is they all of a sudden have this neighbor that wants to buy the property.
Yeah.
They've kind of committed it, but they want to get the deduction. If they don't take these steps in the right order, we can really mess that up, and they might miss out on the charitable deduction, the full funding of the gift, all of that. So do keep in mind, and again, an attorney is going to help with this, a charitable foundation can help, we can help, but make sure you take the right steps before gifting property. But it can be a huge, in this case, family farm, heirs don't want it. This can be a great way of getting both the stream of income and supporting charity.
Yeah. And something that we haven't talked about specifically that's often paired with this, and I mentioned, in the late 90s, we talked about this a lot, where there's the lower estate tax limits. In some of these cases, the people who own the farmland would like to see assets go to kids and grandkids. And of course, there's the charitable remainder trust payout. But something that often comes into play too is you could look at it and say, maybe buy a life insurance policy
Mhm.
maybe one that covers both spouses, what's called a second to die policy, because the pricing is favorable, and own that in an irrevocable trust.
Mhm.
So it's outside of the taxable estate. And in the late 90s, this was a big strategy. You take that stream of income from the charitable remainder trust and gift that to a separate life insurance trust.
Yeah.
So the farm or whatever property we're talking about that had a big locked up, tax liability on it is out of the estate and has gone to a charitable cause, which is a wonderful thing. And then the stream of income from that charitable remainder trust funds the life insurance policy in an irrevocable trust, sometimes called a wealth replacement trust.
Mhm.
That's what would pay off and go to the kids or grandkids, estate tax and income tax free if it's properly structured. So it's not the only thing. It's not a must do. We're not insurance agents. We don't make a nickel off that recommendation, but it is, I think, one of the interesting, use cases for permanent life insurance that's still out there if someone's charitably inclined, is that type of strategy.
Great idea. Yes, the ILIT can be a really good option, and to fund it with those payouts can be another really great solution as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Maybe one other detail here, Christy, the remainder beneficiary of a charitable remainder trust could actually be a donor advised fund. Is that correct? And so the family could still be involved in directing gifts from that pool of assets. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. So it could all go fund a donor advised fund. I see a lot of families when they utilize the donor advised fund out of
Mm,
that final remainder balance. It's not uncommon for them to name some charities themselves. So maybe there's 3 to 5 that they
yeah.
love. They definitely want to make sure they receive something, but then also keeping a portion in that donor advised fund, naming kids, grandkids as the advisor so that they can continue that legacy of generosity. It's a really beautiful way of
Yeah.
carrying that
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, for the family tradition, that's great. Or I think sometimes people get a little stuck and say, "Well, I like this idea, but I'm not sure,
Mhm.
who I want to give all of this to and that full commitment." And so, like you say, you can divvy it up and leave yourself some wiggle room in terms of the gifting on the back end. That's great. Oh,
Exactly.
okay. So another scenario, and this one is not even one particular, but it's one we see a lot. We do a lot of work with corporate executives here, Christy. We live in the Twin Cities. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. A lot of these folks have done very well. They get stock options or restricted stock or performance shares or stock grants. Sometimes they're required to hold a certain percentage in the company stock, 2 times their salary. And so what happens is, if it works out well, they may end up with a large concentrated block of company stock. And we look and say, that's worked well for you in the past, but that way of building wealth is not always the way to maintain wealth. And there's significant wealth with that focused, concentrated position. They're not always excited to sell because of the tax liability. Charitable remainder trust, something to look at.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Charitable remainder trust, a donor advised fund combo.
Mhm.
And again, it can be all or part.
Yeah.
And the biggest piece when it comes to stock is just how is it held? I'm working with a family right now. They have 12% bank stock. Well, the way that bank stock is structured makes it actually impossible for it to be gifted to a charitable remainder trust.
Mhm.
So we're now trying to figure out some alternatives for them to release that stock, mitigate tax, be generous. So understanding how it's structured is important, but charitable remainder trust can be a really great solution to that as well.
Yeah. Okay. And it doesn't have to be an executive with one company stock. I mean, as I look at some of the folks we're talking to day to day, they may have large growth stocks, especially the technology focus that they bought 20 years ago that have quadrupled in value. And they may be in the form of a mutual fund or exchange traded fund, and they still have significant value that they could look at. So,
It's a great option.
well,
Mhm.
lots of interesting uses for this. It's a great tool. Is there anything else you'd like to share about how folks could work with you or organizations, or about your own work in Apex?
Sure. Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we do when it comes to serving families is helping them understand what their current plan does and integrate these different charitable vehicles with their own assets. So it's not that illustration I pulled up with examples of, it's really, okay, you have X number of dollars in bank stock or X number of dollars in real estate or whatever that thing is, and beginning to just integrate creative strategies, both in mitigating tax, but giving generously. And so Scott and I can work together to create that, but being able to visualize options helps, I think, us make really wise choices that, again, align with who we are and our values. So anything on that front, or if you just want to pick my brain on all things charitable vehicles, I'm also wide open for that. My goal is to help people just understand what's possible.
That's great. That's great. Well, really enjoyed the conversation. It was great. Christy Boysen with Apex Legacy Consultants. I'm Scott Oeth, Cahill Financial Advisors. And this is wonderful. If you're listening to this in audio format, you should know that, or you just want to see it again, I'm posting this on my blog, scottoeth.com, and there's video there. And Christy had some nice slides kind of illustrating some of these topics. So it's worth giving that a look. And of course, you can call Christy, you can call myself at the office, and we're happy to talk this through and how it may apply to your own specific situation. So thank you, Christy.
Yes, thanks for having me. I will send all of this your way so you can share it as you'd like.
Excellent. Excellent. Until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.